All right, Bigger Pockets community. Andrew Cushman here. Hope you are doing well. We are back for part 5 of our 8-step series on how to buy your first or 10th multifamily property. Glad to be back. And as you guys join, please feel free to let us know where you're coming in from and from around the country, around the world. Thank you for the big stream of hearts that just floated up on Instagram. Now, for those of you who are on Instagram, which looks like to be quite a few of you, which is super cool. Thanks, Miriam, for the wave. We do have slides, but those slides are on Facebook. So hello, Joseph's in New Jersey. So the slides are shown in Facebook. But you can definitely ask questions on Instagram, post questions on in the comment section on Facebook. We will try to address as many of the questions as we go, as much as we can. Hello, Phil from New Jersey. And we're going to talk about today step 5, letter of intent, or purchase and sale agreement. So, hey, Kate, hello from Atlanta. Good to see you. We love Atlanta. We've been investing in Atlanta for 10 years, or actually more than that. Oh, Diego from Madrid, Spain. Awesome. Thank you. We got people from all over the world. Copper from Tennessee. And we got Delaware, all kinds of folks online. So we're going to go ahead and jump in. Again, please feel free to ask questions. We'll get, I charged up says, let's get paid. I love it. Ask as many questions as you think of. We'll try to get to them as we're moving through the presentation. And if we get done early enough and we missed them, then feel free to just go ahead and repost your question, or I'll try to go back as much as possible and scroll through. So quick recap for those of you who maybe missed the first 4 presentations or don't know who I am. Bigger Pockets episode, I think it's 179 and 270, or I get them confused. I should memorize those, but I've been on a couple of times. The full story is there, but the short version is, used to be a chemical engineer, went into flipping houses full-time in Southern California, and then said, okay, that's pretty good, but it's a full-time job. So what builds more passive income and creates more wealth? And said, okay, well, that's apartments and multifamily. So went into multifamily, did syndication, which means we pool investor funds to be able to buy these deals. In the last 10 years, we've done about 2,100 units, and that's in Texas, Florida, and Georgia. So that's kind of who I am and my background, and let's dive in. So the first week, we did real quick how to choose a market, right? So if you're in California and you're like, there's no cash flow here, how do you pick a market anywhere around the country? How do you build a team? How do you assemble the people that not only are going to be your internal team, maybe partners or assistants or whatever, but your external team, property managers, brokers, lenders, insurance people, all that kind of thing. The third week, we talked about screening properties. This is where it gets really fun because now you're generating lead flow and properties are showing up in your inbox every morning. Brokers are calling you, and it's like, okay, well, you're not going to analyze 10 properties a day. So how do you weed that down to the 2 that are the best fit? And that's where we did screening properties. And then today we're going to talk about, again, letter of intent, which is what LOI stands for. And then PSA is purchase and sale agreement, right? So what this means is you've done all those 4 steps. You have identified a property that you want to acquire and that you want to make an offer on, and that you're hoping to add to your portfolio. So again, now it's getting more exciting, right? We've screened properties and we're like, oh, hey, we kind of like these 2. And now we've done some analyzing and we're saying, hey, you know what? We really do want to own these ones. We're going to make an offer on this. So that's the point in the process where we are today. And let's dive right in. All right, so quick question for everybody out in the Bigger Pockets world. How many offers have you submitted in the last 6 months, right? So it doesn't necessarily how many did you get accepted, although I would love to hear that too, but how many offers have you made in the last 6 months? That can be single family, that can be multifamily, that can be in-state, that can be out of state. Just really curious for the couple hundred people that are on here right now, how many offers have you put in? Or feel free to say, hey, you know what? I'm just getting going and I'm hoping to put in offers. So, all right. So we got on Facebook, Sahan Bonds has put in 10. We got a bunch of zeros coming up on Instagram, which means you're at a great point. You still got the whole second half of the year to start adding to those. JC Stars 24, great job. Kate on Facebook, 0, but looking at one right now. Paul Newman's done 3. Hey, Paul, I recognize you from a few other episodes that we've done. Thanks for keep coming back. Appreciate that. Lots of folks just getting going. So, all right, well, cool. I'm glad to hear that, because you're in the right place. That's why we're doing this series. How do you go from 0 to 10 properties, right? And making offers. All right, we got Maine Hiker Girl. Love the handle, by the way. 5. So, all right, good. We got some active investors on here, and we got a bunch of people who are looking to start making their first offers. So, hey, charged up 15. Finally got one closing on a single family as we speak. Congratulations. So see, guys, everybody, there are deals out there. Paul Newman says twice on the same house. All right, so LOI and PSA, let's jump in. Again, LOI stands for letter of intent, and that's exactly what it is. It's just a letter that includes a bunch of terms that we're going to go over that says it is my intent as the buyer to purchase this property under these terms, right? So that'll include purchase price, how much earnest money or deposit are you putting down? How long is the inspection period going to be? Are you going to inspect it in 10 days, or are you going to take 30 days, right? Sometimes you might want to add proof of funds, not always, especially if you're syndicating. Another thing a lot of times we'll include is a deal reference sheet saying, hey, we've done this many properties in this market, and therefore we have a track record. We're a strong buyer. Now, those of you who are just getting started say, well, crap, I don't have any of those things. No worries. First of all, in the beginning, we didn't include either of those as well. So don't worry about not having it. It's definitely not a required thing. And then second of all, you can always partner with somebody who does have those things, right? So for example, if we're making an offer on a huge apartment complex that requires a very significant down payment, we will get a proof of funds from one of our partners who has a very large net worth, right? So again, everything doesn't have to be yours specifically. So, I just want to give a shout out to David Klein on Facebook. He's averaging 4 offers a week since the beginning of the year. That's the way to do it. You get lots of leads, lots of offers, because if you're not making offers, you definitely won't be buying properties. So great job, David, and thanks for sharing that. So all right, let's keep moving. I mentioned some of the things that are kind of included in the letter of intent, and the next couple of slides, we're going to go over just kind of the general outline. And again, you don't have to have everything that's in here that we're going to talk about in here. We just kind of want to make this fairly exhaustive. And then also, in some states, especially Texas comes to mind in particular, there are even on commercial property and apartments, there are just kind of state realtor association forms. And a lot of people prefer to use those. I always prefer to use our own documents that we created for a lot of reasons. For one, it's your voice. 2, by creating your own document, it's kind of the equivalent in the sports world of having the home court advantage, right? If someone wants to negotiate that document, the whole thing came from you. So the whole thing is generated by you, and they're going to pick some things out and say, oh, we don't like this, or we want to change this, but everything else that gets left is going to be what you started with. So I like having the home court advantage. So some of the things that are in the LOI or the offer letter. Number 1, the name of the purchaser, right? So that might be your personal name. Preferably, it should be some kind of entity that you have. So for us, we make that offer in the name of Vantage Point Acquisitions. We won't close under that name, but that's the offer. That's our public-facing business that we make offers with. Of course, the purchase price, right? Especially these days, that's the first thing everybody wants to know, especially the seller. Like, okay, are you gonna, what are you gonna pay for this thing? There's a second paragraph that outlines the inspection period. So again, I mentioned this earlier. Are you going to take 10 days to inspect it? Or are you going to take 30? How long? And again, in today's market, very competitive. The shorter you can make that, the better. Something else that we include sometimes is a list of the due diligence documents that we're going to want to have, right? If you're buying a single family or a duplex or a fourplex, this probably won't apply and you're probably going to leave this out. But if you're buying a 10 unit or a 20 unit, you're going to request things like a rent roll, a trailing 12 P&L, see if they have an environmental report, property tax records, right? And just think of any information that you would want as a buyer of a property. You list that out for due diligence documents that you're going to look for. Again, sometimes we actually save this for the purchase and sale agreement now. Sometimes we put it in the LOI. It just kind of depends on our sense of what the seller is looking for. Another thing you're going to include in here is earnest money. How much of a deposit are you putting down, and how much of it is quote unquote hard, which means non-refundable, right? So if you're making an offer on a house or a duplex or a fourplex, you might put 1 or 2% deposit, or sometimes people just put $5,000 or $10,000, almost regardless of what the percentage is. And you usually have maybe 30 days to inspect or something like that. When you start going to 5 or 10 unit and larger apartment complexes, that earnest money can be 1 to 2% of the purchase price, but in many cases, some of it's non-refundable right off the bat, right? So you're going to lay that out in the letter of intent. I wanted to grab a quick question off of Facebook. Paul Newman posted, have you ever put in anything in an LOI more personal, like pictures of your kids, stuff like that? Short answer is no. The reason being, we are generally offering on bigger stuff that's like 80, 100, 200, 300 units. And the ownership tends to be more professional and more just kind of numbers based and business based. It's not necessarily there's less of an emotional aspect to it, although you'll definitely end up working with some emotional people, but there's generally speaking less of an emotional aspect to it. Whereas a single family house, it's like my grandmother, raised her kids in here. You're not going to run into that in an apartment world. However, Paul, if you're going direct to owner, and maybe you're talking to, a doctor or a neighbor or somebody that owns a 10 unit or a 5 unit, and you are, and it's more relationship based, and you feel that would build a better connection with them. Say, hey, for example, Paul, I don't know where you're from, but let's just say you're in Columbus, Ohio, right? And Paul just confirmed he's doing direct to owner. So yes, you might want to consider that a little bit more. So let's say, Paul, you're in Columbus, Ohio, and you find a family owns 10 unit. Yeah, it might actually be beneficial to put your picture at the top of the letter and say, hey, I'm Paul Newman, and I live locally here in Columbus, and I specialize in buying properties just like yours. Maybe you drive by it or do Google Earth and include a picture of the property. So yeah, if you're doing smaller stuff, Paul's in Kansas City. Okay, if you're doing smaller stuff, the personal touch can be beneficial. If you as you go larger, I would say maybe 50 units on up, that can actually backfire because they're going to see you as a small time operator, right? They're again, once you're talking 100 units, it's more you're dealing with businesses and LLCs and all that. So small stuff that could be helpful. Big stuff, I probably would not recommend it. Great question though, and thanks for adding that. Really appreciate it, Paul. All right. Part 2 of the offer letter or letter of intent. What is your plan for financing? So that's something that an owner is always going to want to know is, are you buying this all cash? Are you getting a 75% LTV loan? Are you trying to go get a highly leveraged 90% bridge loan or something like that? You want to include some basic details of what your financing is. And if you have a lender that you've worked with before, a lot of times we include that. We'll say, hey, we're going to get a Fannie Mae loan through Berkadia, and we've worked with them for the last 10 years and done this many loans. So basically, the idea is you're trying to do everything you can honestly to give the seller a sense that you are a strong buyer. And again, for those of you, when we asked about, hey, how many offers do you put in, and you haven't put in any yet, this doesn't have to be you personally. This can be a partner. It can be a mentor. It can just be, bring somebody else in. If you feel you have a gap, number one, it's probably not as bad as you think. And two, you can bring somebody else in to help take care of that. So, all right, next is extensions. This is something that I highly recommend you build into any offer. And that is, and thank you for all the hearts on Instagram. At least one person is definitely enjoying this. It is often rare that I shouldn't say rare, but it is frequent that something comes up to delay closing of a property, right? You may say, okay, we're going to close this in 45 days. Well, maybe a third-party report doesn't come in on time, or the city holds something up on an inspection, or any number of things, right? Maybe there's an environmental issue, or something comes up to delay it. What you don't want to do is be in a position of, oh, crud, we're 2 weeks from closing. Now we got to negotiate an extension. And, sometimes in today's market, a lot of times the seller could have the upper hand. The seller can be like, nope, I'm keeping your deposit if you don't close in 2 weeks. And then I'm going to go sell to another guy who's going to pay me more for the property, right? So you don't want to have yourself in that position. So you put in the original offer in the LOI, and then eventually in this purchase and sale agreement, okay, I am allowed to purchase an extension, a 15-day extension for X amount of money, right? So how that exactly works will depend on the size of deal you're doing. But, for us, on larger properties, we say, okay, we have the right to 3 15-day extensions, and we get those by paying an additional $15,000 in deposit. And as long as we close, that extra $15,000 gets applied to the purchase price, right? So it doesn't cost us anything if we close. If we fail to close, then we lose that additional $15,000. So that's gives the seller comfort that, okay, even though you're delaying, you're still going to close this because now you have more skin in the game, right? So have the extension thing built in advance so that you don't end up in a tough situation closer to the end of closing, right? Also, we like to include a paragraph in the offer that says, hey, the seller agrees to continue operating the property like they already have been, right? And the idea behind that is you don't want to get a seller that says, oh, cool, I just sold this to Paul. I'm going to have all my money in 2 weeks. I'm in 2 months. I'm going to Cancun. I'm out of here. Takes his eye off the ball. And by the time Paul closes, there's 50% vacancy because all the tenants have moved out, right? Or the current owner has stopped spending any money repairing anything. And so now you got a bunch of deferred maintenance and crap going on when you close, right? So we have a paragraph in there that says, hey, seller, you have to keep operating this all the way up until closing, just like you would have if it wasn't for sale. And then we also have the final paragraph is that we have a little bit of buyer qualifications, right? And again, for those of you who don't have a property yet, you can add a partner or do something, or a mentor, or just bring somebody else in that says, hey, my team is qualified. But basically, this is whatever you can put in there to convince the seller that you are qualified to buy this property and you're going to be able to close, right? And again, going back to our conversation about going direct to owner with Paul, if it's a smaller property, you're going direct to owner, you're building that relationship. This is where some additional personal type stuff might be appropriate and might help you get the attention of the seller. So I'm gonna take a quick sip here and see if we got any questions that apply. All right, quick question on Facebook from Joshua. Do you feel building new in regards to a duplex, is that a bad strategy? My thought process is I wouldn't have to do any big upgrades for 10 to 15 years if I built new, unknown on existing. Yeah, you're right, Joshua. Right now, ground up development is pretty tricky and expensive. But if you can build new and then hold it for 15 or 20 years, that's a fantastic strategy because like you said, typically the maintenance and repairs and expenses are going to be much lower for the first 20 years of ownership. And if you are a long-term owner, if you can either get newer construction or build your own, that'd be great. I mean, I can tell you, right? I would love. We've actually been looking at. I met with a developer last week, and the conversation that we had with him was for our syndication business would be for him to actually build a property, an apartment complex for us. We'd have an agreed on price in advance that when he completes it, on a certain timeline, we buy it from him, cash him out. We complete the lease up. So now we have some value add. And then we've got a brand new property that should run very smooth for 10, 15 years or however long we decide to hold it. So yes, if you can figure that out, that is a great strategy. And even in the single family world, in the world of duplexes and fourplexes, that name of that strategy is called build for rent. And it is very popular right now. So yeah, if you could build a fourplex or a 10 unit and refinance out of it and hold on to it, that can be a fantastic strategy. So great question. Thanks for posting that. All right, here's a question that comes up frequently, especially in today's market where pricing is pretty high. And a lot of times you'll submit an offer and the price is one thing, and then the seller comes back and they raise the price on you. But the question that comes up is, should I submit a low offer, right? If somebody's asking $1 million for an apartment complex and I'm underwriting at 700,000, should I make that offer or not, right? Miss Shenny on Instagram says, can you repeat the last statements of the LOI? This is being recorded. So I got it. We need to keep moving forward, but this is recorded, so you should be able to go back and grab it and just in this. And if you do it on Facebook, that slide will be there, and you can just copy it all over. So, all right. So getting back to, should you submit a low offer? Yes and no. Number one is you don't want to be the person who gets a reputation for just throwing out lowball offers all over the place. Because if you do that consistently, eventually nobody's going to take you seriously. You're just going to become the lowball girl or the lowball guy, and eventually you're just going to end up getting largely ignored. So what you want to do is be thoughtful and base your offers on the information available, right? So sometimes we'll talk with owners where they're like, well, just make us an offer. And we're like, well, hey, we'll sign a non-disclosure agreement. Can you show us the financials? No, we don't want to give in. Just make me an offer. Okay. So we'll take a look. We'll make our our best guess of what we could pay for the property. And then we'll make an offer and we'll write up the letter of intent. And we'll just say, hey, this is based on not having any information. There's a possibility that we may be able to increase our offer if you're willing to provide financials and a rent roll and anything along those lines. So again, your offer is largely going to be based on how much information you have. If you have everything, right? If you've got a financials and a rent roll and you've got an environmental report and an old appraisal and just like the tax assessments, if you got all the information, then you should be able to get your offer a lot tighter and be a little more aggressive because there's less unknowns, right? So is largely based on how much you know, because what you risk is effectively a lack of knowledge, right? So the more pieces you know, the generally speaking, the less risk that you have. So the real question again is, all right, I'm low. Do I want to make this offer? The first thing that I recommend doing is just check with the broker, right? So or the agent, how does that conversation go? Say, all right, let's say you're looking at a $1 million apartment property in Houston, and you underwrite it and you come out at 800,000. So you analyze it and you come out at 800,000, and now you call the agent back. You call that broker and say, hey, Mr. Broker, thank you for sharing this deal with me. I really appreciate it. We've taken a look at it, and based on whatever, tailor this to whatever you came up with in your underwriting. But based on the current level of rent and where we think we can get it after renovating it, based on these three comparables, and based on spending this amount of money on renovation, again, whatever makes sense, we can offer $800,000 on this property. I know you said the seller is targeting $1 million, so we're pretty far off. Do you think it's best that we just pass on this, or would you still like us to send an offer and see what happens? 75% of the time, they're going to say, go ahead and send that offer in, right? And the reason being is, number one, the broker's job is to get offers, right? So by giving them a letter of intent or an offer that they can take to the seller, that's still another point in their favor. They say, hey, look, here's another offer, right? There may be 15 other offers, but they look even better if they get 16. So number one, they're going to be incentivized to bring that offer, even if it's low, because of that. Two, it's a benefit to you because the more legitimate offers that you put out on properties, the more that the brokers and the owners see your name in the ring, right? And the more that your name gets seen, the more it gets recognized, the more that sellers and brokers are going to think of you when they come across good deals. So that's why, even if an offer is a bit low and the broker says, yeah, go ahead and send it in, that you're going to want to do that. And then also you might just get countered, right? You offer 800 and the seller comes back at 925. Well, cool. You just found out that their real price is at least 75,000 lower than what they were asking. So that's another potential benefit. Now, in some cases, the broker or the agent is just going to say, yeah, you know what? No, this thing's definitely going to go for $1 million, or the seller won't sell for less than $1 million. They're just going to hold on to it. It's not worth putting in the LOIs. Okay, well, hey, thanks. I still really appreciate the chance to look at it, right? So the answer to the question, should you submit a low offer, is maybe. Call the broker and find out. The worst case scenario is they're going to say, no, don't submit a low offer. And even in that worst case scenario, you've still benefited because it gave you a reason to call and talk to that agent and talk to that broker, which builds the relationship and keeps you top of mind, right? So even if you're not getting the deal, there's benefits to doing all this stuff. All right. Let me see. Oh, why did that not transfer? There we go. A few more points. We kind of touched on this already. Another reason to submit those offers is brokers do keep tabs on who is submitting offers. They like to see who, if they take the time to talk to a buyer and give them information on a deal, and that buyer never submits an offer, well, eventually the broker's just not going to want to deal with that person anymore, right? So if you at least submit offers, it shows that you're worth their time for talking to and sharing deals with. All right, there we go. Got Instagram froze. All right, we're back. Also, deals fall out of contract. So maybe they do have an offer for $1 million and they accept it, and they get 45 days down the road and that buyer doesn't perform. And now the seller, maybe they were trying to do a 1031 exchange, or they're up against maybe their loan is due, or something else is going on that they have to sell now. And now they're in a time crunch. They might come to you and say, okay, your price is low, but I got to get closed. Can you execute on this? Right. So in fact, what I like to say is if we're looking at a property that's listed, we don't want to be highest bidder. We want to be third or fourth place, so that if it falls out, then we get it, but we get it at a better price, right? So that's another reason to do it. And again, we already talked about this, maintaining broker relations. That's another reason we want to do it. Here's a pro tip that I recommend, whether you're doing single family or 500 unit apartment complexes. Always follow up a couple months later. And actually, I would say in many cases, don't even wait that long. Follow up a few weeks later and say, hey, Mr. Broker, how that property that I offered on, in Columbus, how's the transaction going? Does it look like it's still going to move forward and close, right? And sometimes they're like, oh yeah, nope, they just finished their inspections, everything's going great, blah blah blah. That's probably what you're gonna hear most of the time. But sometimes you'll hear, well, you know what? Actually, one of the partners just said that they lost their funding source, and now they're not sure if they're going to be able to close the deal or not. Oh, really? Okay. Well, when will you know on that? Well, we should know in a week. All right. Well, great. I'll call you back in a week, and if something happens earlier, please give me a call. Right. So we've gotten deals that way where the property has fallen out or not closed. And we happen to call, there's one property in particular, we happened to call the day after it fell out of contract. The broker hadn't had a chance to talk to anybody else, so we were first in line. So make sure you always follow up, even if somebody else wins the deal. So what happens if you submit an offer and they counter you? Or in today's market, especially in the commercial world, if you're in a best and final round, right? So for those of you who aren't familiar with best and final, what that means is there's an apartment property, and it could be marketed, it could be off market, either one, and there's 10 offers. And the buyer goes back to the 5 strongest offers and says, okay, there's 5 of you. Please go and revise your offer and give us your best and final offer, right? So your highest price, your most aggressive terms, and then they're going to look at what comes in and go from there. So that's generally how a best and final works. Is they'll come back to the top handful of offers, and they'll say, okay, we're going to give you 4 days to revise your offer and see if you can come up with something better than what you originally submitted, right? Obviously, in most cases, they are looking to get a higher price, but make sure you talk with the broker and find out, okay, well, is there anything else that could make my offer strong? Maybe I can't go up on price much, but what if I increase the deposit? What if I shorten the due diligence period? What if I agreed to, and this is one we've done, what if we agreed to keep the staff? Sometimes that's important to people, right? So talk with the broker, try to figure out what you can do to make your offer stronger in all aspects, not just price. Because even small differentiating factors can help you win a deal. Real quick on Instagram, Michael Truax says, that's how I got my deal. The broker called us back, and the broker skipped putting it back on the market, and called Michael, and he ended up getting the deal. So good job, Michael. That's awesome. Sounds like you're doing it right, and so I bet you got a decent deal, because the deals that go that way tend to be some of the better ones. So great job. Glad to hear it's working for you. All right, negotiating with sellers. This process really starts in earnest once the letter of intent is signed, right? Again, going back to the beginning, the letter of intent is not legally binding. It's just exactly what it says. You're saying, hey, I intend to buy this under these terms. Do you intend to let us buy it under these terms? That's basically what you're saying. And if the seller says, yeah, I do intend to let you buy it under these terms, that's when you're going to the actual contract that is legally binding, right? So as you transition to that process, and in some cases, even as you're refining your LOI, you want to do some things to try to understand the seller's motivation. So the first thing we always do is online research. I can think of a recent one where we found out that the owner really likes sailing and fishing. And you're like, well, what does that have to do with the property? Well, especially if you're meeting directly with them, it might give you some ideas of topics of conversation, especially if you happen to be interested in the same thing, right? Then that's going to be a genuine point of connection. So just getting back to basic negotiation 101 is, the more you can know about the party you're negotiating with, the higher the chance of having successful conclusions to that negotiation, right? And you also want to find out a lot of these things are going to come from the broker, but you want to, well, why is the owner selling, right? Is it they need the money urgently for something else? Are they just retiring? Are they just moving on to another asset? What's the motivation for selling? We always like to find out too, if we can, how long have they owned it? Have they only owned it for 2 years? Or are they legacy ownership where they've owned it for 20 years, right? Typically the broker will tell you that, but if not, a lot of times you can go to the Secretary of State's website and see when they bought it, or there's data sources like CoStar and Reonomy where that will tell you when the property was purchased, right? So we like to find out that information, and then if possible, and this does not happen more frequently than it does, but if possible, try to get a conference call with the actual seller, right? Because again, the more you can make that personal, direct, one-on-one connection, the higher the odds of you winning the deal, because people always invest or work with people that they know, like, and trust. And so if you can get a personal connection, that's definitely going to be an advantage. Again, that's not going to always happen, especially if you're bidding on like a duplex or a fourplex that's on the MLS. The seller is probably really not going to care about meeting with you. But if you're doing small apartment complexes or properties, and especially if you're going direct to owner, then that personal connection can be quite important. All right, I've mentioned some handful of times about negotiating and going on how you develop these things and stuff you're going to want to find out. So I got 3 books here for recommended reading for the mechanics of real estate, like how to run rental properties, how to invest out of state. Brandon and David have written a handful of books that address that. So we've talked before about David Green's long distance real estate investing. Definitely get that. As far as negotiating goes, especially directly with seller, I'm going to recommend top 3 books. You've probably heard of 2, maybe not the third. The first one, it's an old one, but human nature never changes. That's Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. Read that, highlight it, and then study everything you highlighted frequently. The second one is Jim Camp, C-A-M-P, Start with No. It's a counterintuitive negotiation approach, but when you read it and understand it and sit and think about it, you're like, wow, that completely makes sense. And if you employ it, you'll be amazed at how well it works. And then most recently, a lot of you guys have heard, I think, pretty sure Chris was on Bigger Pockets podcast, but Chris Voss's Never Split the Difference, right? I would highly recommend everybody read those 3 books in addition to David's about the mechanics of investing out of state and out of market. So those 3 books will get you a huge head start. All right, so on to the purchase and sale agreement. Number 1 thing to keep in mind is you are not under contract until your purchase and sale agreement is signed by both buyer and seller. This is important in a market like today where, a last minute offer can come in, in the last second, and all of a sudden the seller's like, oh, hey, wait a second. Never mind, Andrew, this guy over here is going to give me an extra $100,000. So you are not legally under contract until the contract is fully signed by both parties. That also applies to the letter of intent. Again, that's non-binding. So, well, in most cases, it's non-binding. So just because both parties signed a letter of intent doesn't mean the deal is necessarily yours. It means that all intents and purposes it's yours, but not truly until you get that contract signed. So keep that in mind. Another question that often comes up is, well, hey, when do we use an attorney when we're doing a purchase and sale agreement? Once again, if you're looking at a duplex or a fourplex or something like that, and it's on the MLS or it's with a residential agent, you're probably just going to want to use the standard in California, it's called a CAR form, California Association of Realtors. So whatever version of that exists in your state, you're probably going to want to use that. If you're doing larger properties, like 10 units, 20 units, 30 units, and especially upwards, anything bigger than that, you're going to want to draft your own contract from scratch. And that is when I say you, I don't mean you, I mean your attorney. This is not something you want to do on your own. Probably no one listening to this is qualified, myself included, to draw up your own contract. You want to spend the money for a qualified real estate contract attorney to draw this up. The good news is, once you do it the first time, you're going to have a template to build off of future times, and it gets way cheaper, right? So if you're offering on a duplex or a fourplex, you can probably use the standard realtor forms. If you're offering on bigger stuff, you want to get an attorney to draft a contract for you. And then Also, and we include this in our letter of intent, is we always try to be the party that creates the first draft of the purchase and sale agreement, right? Because, and the reason is, if they draw up the purchase and sale agreement and send it to you, you're going to read through and be like, oh, I can't accept this, or there's going to be some things that you're not going to want to agree to. But the entire thing is framed how they wanted it framed. So if you're making an offer, or if you've got an LOI accepted, now you're sending them a contract, even though it can cost you a little more money up front, you want to be the one to draft that contract, because now the entire thing is framed in your language and from your perspective. And again, it's like having the home court advantage in basketball or any sports, right? So if you can draft the contract, the first draft yourself, and if you're syndicating, meaning you're doing large deals or you're bringing in investors, that contract attorney, that is a cost of the deal. That's an expense of the deal, and you should get reimbursed for that at closing. So highly recommend getting a qualified attorney, ideally an attorney that is based in whatever state that you are buying your property in. All right, a few more important PSA points. Make sure you really reiterate and flesh out any terms that you put in the letter of intent or the LOI. So if you said, hey, we want 3 extensions for $15,000 a piece, reiterate that in the purchase and sale agreement, because at this point, once you sign it, it becomes legally binding, and you're going to want to have that backup just in case. Make sure that your contract is assignable, right? So what that means is let's see here. Let's say Michael Truax from Instagram. Maybe he's making an offer as Michael, but when he closes, he's going to close under, Truax Properties LLC or something like that, right? And so your contract should say that the contract is assignable. And some sellers will say, oh, no, you can't do that, because they think you're going to try to wholesale or something. And you just say, oh, no, you can say, oh, it's assignable to a related party, right? What that does is that gives you the flexibility to make an offer, get it accepted, and then sometime between that and closing, you create your LLC to put the property in, and then that LLC closes on it, right? So you want it assignable. You're going to reiterate things like the date that the deposit is due. When is the EMD, earnest money deposit, due? What is the effective date? Meaning, if you say that you have 30 days to inspect and then 30 days to close, the effective date is the date that 60-day period starts, right? So, what is that? Due diligence delivery date. How many days does the seller have to give you the documents you're requesting, right? So a P&L, a rent roll, the tax statements, right? How much time are you giving them to deliver that? And then what happens if they don't deliver it on time? Because I can guarantee almost every time the seller's not going to deliver all of it, and they're not going to deliver it on time, right? So what happens in that case? And then, we talked about the extensions. How are expenses going to be treated, right? Well, how are things going to be prorated? How is rent going to be prorated? If you close in the middle of the month, if you close, in the middle of July, well, the rent for the second half of July, the seller needs to credit that to you, right? What about utility bills that haven't been billed yet? All those things get addressed in the purchase and sale agreement. Another handful of points to make sure that you get addressed, or that you do address. There's something called reps and warrants, and what that stands for is representations and warrants. And what that means is let's say the seller gave you a rent roll. You want it in your contract that your contract says that the seller gives you representations and warrants saying that rent roll and that P&L, to their knowledge, is accurate, right? Basically, this is your fraud prevention statement. So that this gives you recourse if the seller's like, well, this thing's 50% vacant, but you know what? I'm going to give Michael a rent roll that shows only 5% vacancy, so he'll think he's getting a better deal. And hey, once he goes under contract, tough luck, right? You put in your contract that the seller gives or is representing that the information is accurate. It'll help. It will prevent almost all of that stuff from happening, because now you have very strong legal recourse. So Make sure that you have that in there. Are you going to have a financing contingency, right? So basically what that says is, in today's market, most offers don't have financing contingencies. And what that means is, hey, my responsibility and obligation to close is not dependent on my loan getting approved. And you say, well, whoa, I have to get this loan in order to close on the property. That is usually the case. And that means if you don't get the loan, then you're probably going to lose your deposit, right? So what you're saying is you are so confident in your ability to get the loan that you're not going to make the transaction contingent on it. And unfortunately, that's basically par for the course in today's market. It's very, very difficult to get an offer accepted with a financing contingency. Let me see here. Casualty and condemnation. You basically, what that is what happens if a building burns down while you're under contract, right? This part of the contract determines, like, okay, if that happens, does the seller just give you the insurance proceeds? Are you allowed to back out of the deal with no penalty? What happens if a building burns down or the city comes in and condemns the building, right? That's why it's called casualty and condemnation. So you want to address what happens in those situations, because if a building burns down and it's a 4-building property, you might not want to buy that anymore, right? So that's an important piece of the contract. What happens if the seller defaults, right? What happens if the seller just says, I'm not going to give you any of that due diligence documentation, or you get to closing, like, oops, occupancy is down to 70%. Then what happens, right? So you want to put in something in the contract of what your recourse is if the seller defaults. And you'd say, might want to say, geez, why would the seller default? Very common in today's market, actually, because prices are increasing so fast that a seller will often go under contract with you, and then a month later, they're like, hey, I could have gotten an extra $100,000 if I sell to this other guy. Now, all of a sudden, they have motivation to get out of the deal with you, right? So you want to make sure you've got provisions in there that give you some leverage if the seller defaults. And then also you want to have in there that the seller can't sign any new contracts, right? They can lease to residents, but they can't sign a new cable deal that restricts you to only using Cox for the next 5 years. And then the current seller gets a $10,000 bonus from Cox. He leaves with that. And then now you're stuck with a bad cable deal or something like that, right? So those are 10 things that we like to include. That minimum. There's a handful more. We could do a whole course on purchase and sale agreements, and everyone would probably go to sleep. But it's incredibly important. Those are definitely the highlights. If you missed any of those, again, this Bigger Pockets is recording this. You can go back and either take screenshots or just take notes on what all of those things are. All right, a few just kind of random PSA tips and tricks that I recommend that can give you a small edge in today's super competitive market. We like to specify business days, right? So, for example, one of the most common things that this applies is, the contract will state that your earnest money deposit is due 3 days after the contract is fully executed, right? Well, if you're signing on Friday, that means your money has to be in on Monday. Well, what if it's a holiday, right? Now, and again, a good contract will exclude holidays, but if you say 3 business days, that can end up giving you an extra day or two to get your money over, depending on when you sign your contract. And I know that doesn't sound huge, but we have had situations where that saved us $75,000 because we had just a couple extra days in there, and we were able to get on the property, do inspections before the deposit was actually due. And then we actually found a bunch of stuff that the seller was lying about. And that's actually one of only 2 deals we've backed out of in the last 11 years. And it saved us a $75,000 deposit, right? So along those same lines, the contract should specify that the deposit is non-refundable when deposited, right? So you don't want to say that the deposit is non-refundable when the contract is signed, because then if something were to happen and you were to not close in the deal and you hadn't yet sent the deposit, they could take you to court and force you to give them the deposit, right? Whereas if the contract says it's not refundable once you've deposited it, that gives you a few extra days, right? Also, this is the next one can be incredibly helpful. It's a reasonable request. We don't always get it accepted, but I'd say the majority of the time we do. Your inspection period doesn't start until the seller gives you all the documentation that they've promised to give you, right? Because if you don't have this in here, they can say, okay, cool, you've got 20 days to inspect it. And then on day 18, they finally give you the documents you need. You didn't really get an inspection period, right? Whereas if you tell them, hey, my inspection period starts once you deliver this stuff, they're going to be motivated to just hurry up and get it to you. So that's an important one. Sometimes you can trade work for price, right? Meaning, let's say, the seller's stuck on getting a certain number, but you can't quite get there. You can say, hey, we'll give you this price and you agree to repair the roofs before we close. Right? We did that on our last deal where the seller agreed to do a whole bunch of painting before closing rather than us ask for a credit or have to increase our renovation budget. We said, hey, we'll give you this price if you get this work done for us before closing. He got the work done. He did a great job. We were able to keep the price where it was, and it worked out fantastic. Another thing is include basically a fee or penalty for unrentable units, right? So what that means is the seller can't just have people move out and leave units in crappy condition, and you're stuck with cleaning them as soon as you buy. What we like to say is, all right, if anyone, if we are within 3 days of closing, any vacant unit has to be rent ready. Right. So if 10 days before closing, someone moves out and they trash the unit, the seller has to clean it up and repair it and not stick you with that expense. So those are a handful of things that we've added in over the years that we always keep in there and have definitely saved us time, money, and headache. So, all right, we got about 5 minutes for any additional questions. If I missed your question earlier, I know there's quite a few that I missed. I apologize. We're trying to make sure we get through the whole thing here. But so if I missed a question earlier, please just go ahead and repost that so it comes to the top of the list, and I'll try to grab it. And of course, if I can, I'll go ahead and scroll back. But yeah, we got just a couple of minutes here for questions. So I am going to take a sip of water so I don't lose my voice here. I'll give you guys a few seconds to post those questions, and then we'll get on hopefully answering them. All right. So, all right. The new mannerisms on Instagram says nice pro tips. Appreciated. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Oh, did we just lose our share screen? Oh, that's all right. I wanted to go over, actually, so we'll get to the questions in just a second. So next week, we're going to be talking about due diligence. So you got your offer accepted, you are under contract, and now you're going to go inspect the property, and that's called due diligence. That is when you walk all the units, you dive deep into the rent roll, the leases, all that stuff. So that's what we're going to be talking about next Wednesday. And then the two topics after that are going to be, financing and getting the proper debt strategy. And then the one piece that's not ever talked about, but is candidly the most important, is asset management, right? What happens after the deal, after you've bought the deal? Because the money is really made after closing. So, all right. So let's go ahead and try to grab a few questions here. Did I miss anything on Facebook? Let me see here. We got, all right, we got a few people who, how do you determine the cap rate for a new area? Basically, really the easiest, there's a handful of reports you can get, but in your conversations with brokers, just say, hey, if this property is fully stabilized and fully marketed, what cap rate would you think it would trade at, right? You ask that question enough times, you're going to develop a good sense of what cap rates are in your market. Chino asks on Instagram, oops, almost lost it. I have a primary residence with 100,000 equity. I want to buy a multifamily. Should I cash out, refinance, or get a HELOC? That depends on your long-term strategy. HELOC, the benefit of that, or home equity line of credit, the benefit of that is you don't pay interest on the money until you actually use it. But the downside is the interest rate you do pay is usually higher than if you just refinanced the property. So if the money, if you don't know when you're going to use the money, and if you think it's only going to be invested for a short period of time, the HELOC might be the way to go. If you're going to put that $100,000 into a property and leave it for a long time, you might want to consider the refinance. So good question. Somebody asked, how old is that surfboard? I don't know. I've had it for a good 10 years. It's one of my favorite boards. It's a good one. So, all right, let's see if we can squeeze in one more question here. Oh, here's a good one. Excuse me. What is the best loan to have for year term on a buy and hold refi for 32 units? That was Lizica on Instagram. Unfortunately, you got left off how many years you were talking about. But if you're doing short term, you might want to consider bridge or bank financing. If you're looking for long term, 5-10 years or longer, then that's where the government sponsored entities like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac can come in really handy with long-term fixed debt. So, all right, that is all the time that we have today for questions. I appreciate everybody hanging in there. We had a good-sized audience today. Lots of good questions. Make sure you like and share. If you missed anything, this is recorded, so you can go back and get that information from the slides on the recording. And look forward to talking to everybody next week, same day and time. In the meantime, if you are one of those people who hasn't put in an offer, go out and put in your first offer. And when we talk next week, let me know that you did that. And if you're already making offers, go out there and make a bunch more. The only way to win a deal is to put in the offer. So, the new mention says, thanks, man. You're welcome. Definitely enjoyed talking with y'all. Have a great rest of the week and talk soon. Take care.